Nietzsche wrote, "At bottom, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross. It is an error amounting to a nonsensicality to see in faith, and particularly in faith in salvation through Christ, the distinguishing mark of the Christian. Only the Christian way of life, the life lived by him who died on the cross, is Christian," end quote. Clearly, the various churches throughout history have done a poor job with the messages of their founders. Should we all have our own singular religion and follow our own paths like the prophets so that we can practice like them?
In a sense, we do have our own singular religion, but
yes, in a sense, we
in
do.
the sense that, you know, everybody has a unique path to follow through life. But
yes, and finally, one is responsible for what one believes and practices.
that's right, as opposed to the people that think whatever they believe is inviolable, is need not be examined because they've already decided everything. And really, it is the human weaknesses showing up in a group, in organization. As soon as you get much of an organization, the function of the organization becomes about the organization rather than the original thing you organized for.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems a kind of inevitable thing, and it's always a pull downward.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's what's happened in churches, even without malevolence.
Did that always happen in churches?
To a certain extent, but I think there was a lot less of it when religions had more to do with the mysteries rather than the thou shalt not and thou shalt.
But there are a lot of people for whom the mysteries are just inaccessible. And
yeah, exactly. They're too mysterious.
What they want or need out of life or are looking for is the thou shalt nots or thou shalt.
Yeah. Well, if they can't approach the mysteries, they have no business thinking that they really know the religion. And in which case they could say, well, I can't quite understand these things, but I know people, you know, who are senior or people who are really devout seem to understand, and I'll kind of rely on their advice. But, you know, to assume that what you know is all you need to know, and all there is to know, that dooms everything.
Well, you know, after reading this, you know, Tolstoy when he was 50, had a religious crisis. And from that point, for the rest of his life, almost another 50 years, he was deeply entwined with a study of the faith and practice of mysticism and everything. But when he saw this statement from Nietzsche, what did he do? He said, you know what? I disagree with Nietzsche, but I also think that he has the point, because, you know, the Christians of his day in Russia were sort of acting similar to Christians of in America today. And so he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to the Greek texts of the Synoptic Gospels, and I'm going to get rid of all the historic dross and everything, and like translate this with a fresh mind. And it's something that great solace to Wittgenstein in the fields of World War I. And I recently reread his version, and he called it The Gospel in Brief. And the thing is, he focused it not around, you know, the mysteries or anything that's complicated or abstruse, but, you know, the practices of Jesus. And, you know, when it comes down to this, you know, basically it's showing that much of what passes for Christianity today really doesn't. And I think that a lot of people, if they just read this simple book by Tolstoy, someone that actually wanted to practice what he believed in, it would solve a lot of problems. But instead, functionally illiterate people randomly pick out some verse they don't understand from the King James Bible and then use that to proclaim hatred rather than love. And it's very reading.
Yeah, that's right. It's cherry picking at the banquet table.
Right.
You know, picking and choosing what strikes your fancy.
It's not just Christians, though. I remember there was an article by Nuhamim Keller where he said that, you know, after he converted to Islam and was studying Sufism, he met a group of fundamentalists. And he said, you know, the sad thing is you can't really despise them because they have good intentions, but their good intentions are so misplaced that you have to really pity them, because these people were trying to find verses in the Quran that justified holding up and robbing liquor stores because they felt like they were doing a good thing because alcohol is haram.
Yeah. Well, I know that's what happens with moralism. But yeah, nobody's immune to it. It's not just Christianity.
So, what's to be done?
Swami Vivekananda said that every person should have their own religion. That's not to say that every person should be a prophet and write a holy book. It's simply to say that every person should, within their intellectual and moral capacity, investigate as much as they're able to, investigate both with their mind and their heart, and finally, take responsibility for their own choices in life, you know?
Yeah, and that's the key, is the taking responsibility, because that's what makes your particular path your own, is that you take responsibility for it, and responsibility for what you believe, and responsibility for how you act, and all of those things. And you make it yours.
Well, the words
by taking responsibility
are incompatible, because the whole point of any fundamentalism is, this is what's written here. I'm going to follow this blindly, and therefore the responsibility is not in my court. I just have to be like some automaton that follows something blindly. I don't have free will or free agency or the ability to take responsibility for freely made choices.
Of course, they think they have those things, but they have abandoned them in order to have a comforting answer of some kind. So there's a danger in consolation that one can get in religion that leads to complacency and smugness and things like that. But you know, the thing is, you can always tell if there's a lack of humility, there's something wrong.
Right.
You know, you can't have sincerity without humility. You know, that's why the virtues are good touchstones.
Yes, you're right, but I just want to widen this a little and say I've found those same attitudes from fundamentalists who are not religious. Those attitudes from fundamentalists who are rationalists and scientists. Scientistic.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same human shortcoming.
And that's completely true, Sheikh Al-Bashir. Actually, you know, it's been quite a while now that I say the only people without a religion are actually agnostics that are truly interested in questioning things. Because atheism itself is a religion. And some of them are just as, if not more, fundamentalist than some of the fundamentalist Christians or Muslims.
Oh,
absolutely.
For sure. The very people I was speaking of. Yeah.
Well, it's, you know, thinking that this truth belongs to you rather than you give yourself to the truth. You adorn yourself with your beliefs and what you consider to be the truth, and it's supposed to justify you in your various misbehaviors. It's just, you know, it's just subjectivity in the regular, ordinary sense of the word. The way most people use the term. It's living in your limitation, embracing it, rather than orienting yourself to something that is unlimited.
So, moving on. Yes.
I just said that sounds right to me.
So, moving on, since a lot of this comes down to, fundamentalism and not fundamentalism, if we're going to follow a religion, how much of our practice and example should be based off of the life of the prophet, considering that a prophet is a human being and was living in a specific time and place?
Yeah.
Good question.
There is a place for the prophet's behavior to give examples of things, but they shouldn't be prescriptions in most cases, depending on what it illustrates. If it illustrates something really important, then maybe so. But it's like literalism, to say, oh, well, the prophet said this or did that, and therefore I have to do this. It's the prophet is the medium, not the message, and it's the message that's important.
I think the Christians have a different view of it.
Well, they might, but I don't know. I mean, you can certainly say that Jesus Christ was the message, and in some sense I can justify that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll never understand it really.
Well, it's also hard to think about where the border is between one's own religion and belonging to a religion. Because, as you say, we finally do have our own religion, in the sense that there are things that we agree to, that we support, that we take responsibility for. And at some point, there are challenges that may be opportunities to examine that or draw lines or leave.
Yes. Well, you should always live near that border so that you're aware of what's on either side of it. If you're not, if you never approach the border, you're not really taking responsibility to know your religion as well as you could.
Well, that's a good point. But when you have that challenge, when you say I belong to this religion or faith, but something has gone wrong. I'm strongly a member of the faith, and I belong to the church, but it's been taken over by white supremacists. And now I have to make some decisions.
Right.
What do I look to give me the strength and faith to step out of the faith?
You don't ignore inconsistencies, for one thing. You can't have somebody promulgating hatred who follows a religion of love. And if you can't deal with that contradiction, then you have to subsume one into the other, and that's not good. In other words, you don't make excuses for everything that people do, including yourself.
And that is specifically why I think most people really need to practically have their own religion, doesn't need to be some spaghetti monster thing. It can be 99.9% based on an existing religion, but it needs to be one's own.
Right. In other words, you can't say the religion belongs to me, but right. You can, in a sense, make it your own by taking responsibility for it.
Exactly. And, the whole point there, the operative word, is that you follow the example of the prophet. You don't follow the prophet. You don't copy the prophet. That's robotic. You follow the example. And the point with an example is it teaches someone how to think, how to do something, but not necessarily to do it in exactly the same way. It's all about intention.
Right. An example is always a fragment, but there's something bigger behind it. I think there are a lot of people for whom they don't think there is anything except bare fact. They don't get allusions. They don't get, they have to read their Bible as literal. It's a serious and fundamental limitation. And I don't know how much of it's inevitable and how much of it is just something that's unfortunately reinforced too much in our current world situation.
And you have to make your own choices. I, for one, if a fly lands in my cup of water, I don't dunk it in and then drink it like the fundamentalist Muslims do.
They do what?
There's a hadith that says, if a fly lands in your water, dunk it in all the way and then drink it, because if one wing is poisoned, the other wing contains the cure.
Oh, geez.
That's a hadith?
That's a hadith, yes. An authentic one.
Well, it just goes to show that you can't take everything literally. I mean, that if is a big if. You know, if one of the wings is poison, the other is the antidote. Yeah, maybe. But you can see that it's talking about something more principial than a fly.
Of course, you can extract, what Holderlin always says, where the danger is, the saving grace grows there too. But it's a principle. It's not to be necessarily taken literally. But personally, in my faith, I reject the hadith. I don't read it. I don't pay attention to it. I feel like it was useful for a specific time and place, perhaps, but there's also a hadith where Muhammad said, burn my hadith, because he specifically worried that people would, follow him in too much of a rote manner.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what people are doing.
Right. I have enjoyed reading hadith at times because for me, it's a challenge to discern what lies beneath it, because all of these things arise in a certain time and place and situation, and if there's truth in it, then it ought to be a little bit free of the time and place. Otherwise, it's just a bare fact.
Right. I mean, the spirit giveth love, but the letter taketh away.
Right. And so that is why literalism, by its very nature, is a problem. It's letterism.
All right. I'll get on to the next question. A certain famous Catholic bishop based out of LA, I won't name any names, who runs a media empire, seems to me to take all the life out of religion and to turn it into a commercial enterprise. It seems he wants nothing more than to get converts. So his organization gives up many principles and tells people exactly what they want to hear, putting out these atrocious YouTube videos on things such as God and gaming. And I mean it. Yeah. There's actually YouTube videos from his organization on God and gaming.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. On the other hand, there have been Catholics in the past 100 years, such as George Bernanos, who said the real hard truth out of respect to the people and because truth is more important than results. Essentially, I pick those two figures because they're so opposite in so many ways. In terms, if you like, for instance, looked to their theological and practical views, what one thinks is great, another one dislikes. If a religion can have two groups of people with such opposite opinions, what does that say about that religion? Is one side wrong and one right?
It means that there are two religions or one religion and a bunch of error. That it's interesting, that quantitative approach to sharing the gospel is, what you see with televangelists and things like that. It's like it's a feather in their cap, every member they get in their congregation. And it's an acquisitiveness rather than an inquisitiveness. It's like it's an ego thing. It's gathering followers. It's almost like hunting. You go out and you find you see the prey and you blast it. You bring it home and eat part of it and mount the head. It's just too gross and low, that the kind of evangelism that is nothing more than winning members.
Yes, we all know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, in my view, it's better to tell the truth to the people and get one convert than tell a falsehood and get 1 million.
Yeah, and even if you never get a convert, if you have a positive influence on people,
Right.
it's a lot better than trying to absorb them into your Borg.
And you know, it's not just that, but the reason I brought this bishop up specifically is because he irks me, because, you know, Catholic bishop that's acting like a Protestant. He wants converts more than he wants the truth. And what, you know, it's a matter of telling people what they want to hear to reel them in and then hook them. But the whole point for me of a spiritual teacher should be to say the hard truths, even if someone doesn't like it, because whether it's a religious teacher or a teacher or a coach for something, you want them to tell you the hard truths, because even if you don't like it at that specific moment in time, that is how growth happens, not by telling you what you hear.
Right. And the fact that a truth is hard doesn't make it any less the truth.
Right. That's true.
Anyway, it you know, it's just a whole lot of believing that it's all about you. And it's only all about you in the sense that you have to be responsible.
Yes, and isn't that the problem we had in our own community? We had a leader who thought it was all about him.
Absolutely. It's a common failing. It's a common temptation, apparently, because so many people fall into it.
I do find that so strange, though, how nothing in the world will preach against taming the ego more than religion. And yet, if you're looking for the most egoistic people, look no further than the local religious teacher.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The thing is, you become arrogant if you believe you have the truth, that somebody needs to hear what you have to say in order to encounter the truth. I mean, it's clear that religion downplays the ego and points out the dangers of it and how to transcend it and things like that. But people still have egos, and if they can't see their egos, they think their ego is them, they're off on the wrong track.
Yes, quite commonly.
And we've already answered question 3B, basically, but regarding 3A, can religion be compatible with commercialism? It seems that Christianity in America is not a religion influenced by capitalism, but capitalism masquerading as a religion. It almost seems to me Christianity doesn't exist in America except as a simulacrum. What do you think?
Yeah, I know what you mean. But people want to appropriate, all kinds of things to justify themselves. And, in our country, we've got this fixation on capitalism, even more so than we do on loving our nation or whatever. And it seems like the only really hard, inviolable principle is capitalism, not religion. But people who believe in capitalism often have to incorporate it into their religious worldview because they're attached to it.
It's just, so different compared to European Christianity.
Yeah, I'm sure.
French Catholicism, English Anglicanism, very, very, very different. Despite both countries being capitalist, being, democracies, the religions themselves are different. They somehow seem less tainted. They seem, if anything at all, especially, English Christianity, at least for a long time, was Christianity tainted by imperialism. But it wasn't doctrine of imperialism under the guise of Christianity. I just don't feel like Christianity really exists in this country. It might for some people, but as an overarching ideology, I just don't feel it exists.
Well, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, but I would certainly say that what most people think is Christianity isn't. They may arrive at what they believe is Christianity through, basically a good impulse. But as soon as they think they understand God, they're in trouble.
And, parts of my family come from, what I tend to call the Protestant Catholic tradition, in that they label themselves Catholics, but they're sort of American Protestants,
Yeah.
And essentially, you have someone like Pope Francis, who's coming along and presenting pretty much what I would say a lot of it is the message of Christ. Let's be less moralistic, let's not hate anybody, and let's take care of the poor. Simple, basic things. And instead, you actually have some of these people here that might even be poor, and they're like, I done dare might be rich someday. I done dare need me to have capitalism, And it's just, it's ridiculous. And instead of having love for their neighbor, they actually instead try to say, they show their religiosity through hate of people getting abortions, hate of people who are getting divorced, hate of people who are doing this or that. And it's just so ridiculous because, going back to Tolstoy again, he said, any religion that's based on hate is a cult.
Oh, it's worse than that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
well,
true.
And you can see the connection to like the gospel of prosperity, where you end up believing that wealth is a sign of God's favor, and yet if somebody is really wealthier than you may resent it. It's just seeing everything in fragments. Gurdjieff talked about buffers, the things that separate the contradictory parts of our consciousness from each other, so that they don't bounce against each other too hard. Allowing you to hold at one moment this opinion, and at another moment the opposite.
So in a lot of our warm-up sessions, there's a lack of love for the right wing in this country, the religious right, I think with good reason. And then we've just discussed about some of the issues with religion in this country, and they may be tied together, but without making some sort of activist proclamation, what do you think individuals and small communities can do in this country to, if not fix things, then to set the ball rolling in a right direction?
That is finally the question, isn't it?
Yeah. And can you get a ball rolling that's actually square? Not everybody can roll. And they don't want a ball rolling. They want to have the one that they clutch tightly as their own. I find myself remembering.
I think this is a very important question, one we should return to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of the story I heard in 12-step groups about the person who appears to be drowning in the water. A person in a boat comes up to help him and sees that he's holding this large rock that keeps weighting him down. He says, "Let go of the rock and save yourself." And the man says, "But this rock has been in my family forever." And finally, in exasperation, the guy in the water says, "Well, here, you take it." And he throws it into the boat, and it breaks a hole in the bottom, and they both drown. I think there's a lesson there. You can't save everybody.
Yes.